Welcome. Well, if you don't know us yet, HR Collaborative is a community of fractional HR experts who help small to mid-sized organizations make work better by providing HR talent and solutions when and where they need it. And in this cafe, we're really excited to be talking about key HR trends in 2024. You know how we all have that crystal ball? We have some HR experts here at HR Collaborative who have dusted off their crystal ball to hopefully give us an idea of what they think will be focusing on in the new year. So can't wait. This is going to be a great day today. So here's a peek at our agenda. And if this is your first time to one of our cafes, welcome. We're so glad that you've made it. And if you've joined us before, thank you so much for coming back. We're happy to have you here again. We know that we have several regulars that we get to see time after time, and we're so glad that you're here. HR Collaborative Cafes aren't your standard webinar. Instead, they're designed to be interactive. And how that will look for us today is that we'll be having a panel discussion with 3 of our very own HR Collaborative's HR consultants. Then we'll spend some time in a breakout room session and continue the dialogue in more of a small group setting. When we enter our breakout rooms, please turn on your cameras so that you can fully engage in the conversation. The presentation and report outs will be recorded, but breakout sessions will not be recorded. And general notes will be taken for your reference and shared after the cafe. Once we're done with our breakout session, we'll come together, recap the themes, and we'll have some time for questions and answers. So let's go ahead and meet the panelists. First, I should probably introduce myself. I am Nancy Johnson, and I'm your host today. I'm People Operations Officer here at HR Collaborative, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists. First, Brenda Lenneman. She is one of our very talented HR business partners. She started as a leadership development expert and transitioned into a business partner capacity. Brenda offers a fresh viewpoint on guiding leaders to craft workplace atmosphere that attracts and retains employees, all while efficiently managing the day-to-day people operations. Before joining HR Collaborative, Brenda spent nearly a decade at Cornwell Health, formerly Spectrum Health, first as a training development manager, and then as a senior HR business partner. So welcome, Brenda. We're so glad you're here. Next, we have Theresa DeVries. As the Vice President of Talent Placement Services for HR Collaborative, Theresa leads our sourcing, recruiting, placement, and engagement of talent. With her education and experience in HR, risk management, employee benefit consulting, Theresa brings an invaluable perspective to matching clients with the talent when and where they need them. Welcome, Theresa. Next, we have Lisa Brown. Now, Lisa's a familiar face to our collaborative cafes because she's typically our host, but today, however, she is joining us as a panelist. Lisa had held nearly every role in her decade of experience in HR. She holds a bachelor's degree in Human Resources Administration from Grand Valley State University. She told me to say, go Lakers. And she's SHRM certified professional. Her specializations include compensation analysis, employee relations and engagement, compliance, and benefits administration. So at this time, I am happy to turn over the conversation to them. And Brenda, you and I were talking, and you gave me a hint of one of the trends you're going to be sharing today, and that's around compliance. Now, compliance isn't always the topic we want to talk about, but for some reason you think it's going to be on our mind next year. So why don't you get us started?
Yeah, all right. Well, good morning. Morning. And December 14th, here we are. Hard to believe that we are about to jump into a new year again. So we've seen a lot this year. The EEOC has been very busy. So our friends at the EEOC, for those who might not be familiar, it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So lots going on over there this year. And I think we're going to see that carry over into 2024. So some of the big notable things where they do have a new commissioner, they have an increased budget as well. And so more money means they're able to do more things, such as more investigations, more litigation. So they're kind of ramping up in that aspect. And I think we're already starting to see some of that. There are reports that fiscal year 23, which ended in September, had a 50% increase in claims over fiscal year 22. So we're already starting to see some of that ramp up. And the other kind of big release that the EEOC had this year was they released their strategic enforcement plan, so the EEOC's SEP, TMA, too many acronyms, but so their SEP basically kind of outlined what they're going to be focusing on over the next several years. So some of those like more notable things is they're really going to target discrimination and bias directed towards, specifically they call it religious minorities, racial or ethnic groups, and LGBTQ plus individuals. So those are going to be some of their focus areas to really target. So probably some of those additional dollars are going to be focused on making sure that those groups are represented. They're going to highlight continued underrepresentation of women and minorities in certain industries that we typically don't see them in, such as construction, finance, tech. So, if you're in some of those industries, maybe take note of that, I would say. And then, one of the other things too is we don't want, it's not the EEOC versus employers. They're not here to just like come after employers. So, part of their plan is how can we also help employers mitigate their risks. So they're going to, support employers to proactively identify and address some of these inequality barriers that they might be seeing in some of their business operations. So all of that is kind of compiled into this big movement of really just trying to, get more equal opportunity for all in the workforce. And, and part of the EEOC is responsible for making sure that we have, that diverse workforce available too, which I'm sure from a TA perspective, you're kind of seeing some of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's hard to, if you're in a certain space where that's a predominantly male or female, job role. I mean, we're going to talk a bit in my kind of trends. It's no big surprise that, there's a lack of talent. I mean, we're not, for lots of reasons, there's just not enough people to fill the open job. So, I guess from a TA perspective, we understand that you try to, recruit, cast the big net, which we'll talk about too. But, I always, I can't make people that don't exist, right? So I can't make more women, and I think, schools and colleges are doing what they can to move people, especially, minorities into STEM, STEM, education or STEM roles, train them up for STEM roles. So that hopefully they're doing their job too.
Yeah.
Making sure that our workplaces are attractive for a diverse workforce as well. So there you go. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that, I think that also kind of feeds into like some of the employee empowerment that we're starting to see. So, the EEOC is at the federal level, but we're seeing that in, many state laws that are coming up right now too, is, when you think of it kind of like as a housing market, you have a buyer's market or a seller's market.
Sure.
And so, right now, if you're thinking employer versus employee, I would tend to say it's probably more of an employee market. They kind of, to your point, like you can't create more people. So they kind of have some of that freedom and flexibility to be a little bit more demanding. So what are we doing as employers to kind of create this environment that we can attract and retain our employees? Because, they sort of have the options right now with where we're at. And along those lines, at the, as I mentioned, at the state level, we're starting to see more of these laws, one of them being pay transparency. So that's becoming pretty big too. So, we already see it in some of the more employee-friendly states, California, Washington, New York. They're enacting these, I believe there's around 10 states right now that have pay transparency, but at least that many, if not more, that are looking into enacting something around that. Michigan being one of, there's a House bill right now that will likely go under review this year. So we don't see it in Michigan quite yet, but certainly something that we would want to watch for. And you know, pay transparency is a good thing for employees. It keeps them engaged, it keeps them motivated. It's clear on, you know, how compensation decisions are made, how performance can affect compensation. So, you know, there's good things with that. It also helps employers because it can, you know, with that transparency, it kind of opens your eyes a little bit more and you're able to see maybe more of areas where you have some discrepancies in your pay philosophies and structure. So, but there's definitely things as an employer that you'll want to do maybe to start prepping for pay transparency laws. Just, you know, I'm working with clients right now. We're really kind of focusing on developing sort of that compensation model and philosophy, doing some benchmarking, that sort of stuff to make sure that, you know, if and when a pay transparency law impacts your organization, you know, you're ready and you kind of got your ducks in a row. I mean, you're our resident comp expert.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I think it's really in the preparation and being able to easily, if and when, it's not really an if, I think it's a when is more of the question now. Is when that takes place, how ready are you to be able to provide that information, or are you gonna have to jump through a bunch of hoops? I think organizations have to be prepared for it because it's coming down the line. It also helps build the trust between the employee and employer because it's less of the unknown and more of the like you said, it's allowing them to see what their potential is. It helps with identifying potential like career pathing or upskilling, you know, like how do I get to the next step? What is my potential at the next step? And it's really really an opportunity to educate employees, not only how they can elevate in their role, but how they can elevate their career, whether it's with their organization or outside of.
Well, and from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, it's a must have. I mean, you definitely should be putting your target salary range in your job postings. And again, along with those pay transparency laws are requirements in those states on the coast to put those in the job posting. And so we always recommend our clients put that in for lots of reasons. So to your point, you better know what the market is because your candidates do. So thanks to AI and Google, I mean, they know what market rates are. So you need to be competitive to get that talent. So highly recommend that that you put those things in your job postings.
What else are you seeing? from a TA perspective?
Oh, boy. Well, I'm gonna start with retention. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think, what's the saying about an ounce of retention, is better than a pound of recruiting. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it sounds right. I don't know.
Anyway, I mean, it's all about retention, right? Because it's, the cost of replacing talent, because it is so difficult. I mean, we just, if you haven't seen the video or read through the white paper, I highly recommend the demographic drought. Because MC, they're a labor market economic research firm, have laid it all out for us. And if, I don't know if you're an educator, if you work for a college, business, we literally are going to face and are right now a lack of people, just humans to do the work. I wrote my stat down. Upward Berry said by 2030, there are going to be worldwide 85 million unfilled jobs because there just are not enough people. In the US alone, it's around 6 million. So, there's lots of reasons, right? Labor force participation is down. You've got, we're not making babies, where there's immigration used to fill some of those roles. And that's kind of been, on pause. So there just aren't enough people. And then you've got this aging workforce too. So if you think about retention, by 2035 in the US, we'll have more people over 65 than are under 18. So if you think about people coming into the labor market, we're already upside down. It's just going to get worse. So how do you retain even older workers? So I know you're going to talk about some retention. So I just want to put my retention hat on out there because it's so much easier. Invest in the talent that you have. But from a recruiting standpoint, it's a competition. It is a competition. It's a numbers game. And when I say it's a numbers game, I mean, you need to know how to cast a wide net. And I like the analogy, you've got your fish tank with all your fish swimming around, you got to clean the tank, so you got to scoop them out, right? Put them in this bowl while you clean your tank. It's much easier if you got a big net, right, to catch those little fast swimmers. So you need to cast that big net. And so how do you do that, right? Comp strategy, right? So what are you paying market? Can you pay market? If you can't pay market, you know, what's your other total reward strategy?
Yeah.
You know, start with your employee value prop right off the bat. Cast that big white net. And the big thing right now, really, and it's been because you can't find the exact same, the person that you want, right? So you list, here's the perfect job description, here's all the skill sets I need, plus I need experience in, you know, China and Taiwan, and, you know, and I want them to be graduated from, you know, an Ivy League school, whatever that is. There's really this shift, and it's been going this way to skill-based versus credential-based. So really, what are the skills that are the must-haves? What skills can you also develop? So as you look at the candidates, you know, what skills are transferable? I mean, it's really, I mean, larger enterprise institutions have been doing this for a while, where they're going through their job descriptions. Does this job really require a bachelor's degree? Or, you know, no, it doesn't, right? You know, and there's a lot of great degrees out there, but when you work in HR, right, I'm sure you have, those of you that do, you see people that have applied that, you know, they have a degree in biology, but they're applying for a marketing role because of their skill set, right?
Yeah.
So really, you know, moving from that credentialing to skill-based hiring, get rid of those, you know, arbitrary and subjective requirements. Really, I mean, again, it's a competition, it's a numbers game. You need to get talent, so you got to just kind of, I don't say lower your standards, but you do need to lower that barrier. So
What do they say, like hire them for their potential, not what they have on paper? You know,
Exactly.
Look at how you can develop them.
exactly.
Well, and I mean, one thing that I'm working with clients on is if we have someone vacate a position, especially in a small company, because, you know, people wear many hats. Well, they did this and they did this and they did this. And so it's like, oh, you know, when you look at, I encourage them to look at the work as a whole that needs to be done. And, you know, did that person who left, did they have a bachelor's degree? But was it necessary, you know? So really just kind of looking at the work that needs to be done and not necessarily trying to replace the person that did all those things. And, you know, can we do some reshuffling? And again, I work primarily with those small companies that, you know, you have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of roles, and there's, so, you know, you kind of shift and shake things up, which is appealing for employees because,
Sure.
you know, it's not just the same thing day in and day out. They have some variety there, but.
Yeah, well, and then once you get them in, right?
Yeah.
We need to keep them. So if you think about the retention piece, and 1/3 of HR professionals have said that there's empathy is lacking at the top. You know, so how can we be, you know, better human-centered leaders?
Yeah, so a big part of, you know, attracting and then definitely retaining talent is balancing the employer versus employee expectations, right? Employees are empowered. They want to work for an organization that's committed to them and the greater good, right? So part of the challenge is providing those soft skills or those frontline managers with that, you know, human-centric leadership skills. And what that means is essentially thinking about your people as people, not resources to do a job, right? You know, they all have different motivators, different ways they're rewarded. So as a leader, being able to be open and receptive to their feedback, being able to look at them holistically, not just at the job that they fill, but what are their passions and drivers as individuals? How can we develop them? You know, seek their feedback on how you manage them and how they would best develop, you know, and communicate with them. Really thinking about, you know, being a little vulnerable too, you know, share with them, you're not perfect, you know, you're not, you're open to being able to lead them in a way that's most effective and communicate with them in a way that will help them succeed in their roles. Another big balance between the employer and employee expectation, you know, we hear a lot of this, like the mandates of the return to office. And, you know, there's a large majority of individuals, I forgot who did the survey, but, you know, nearly half of the respondents said that they would, you know, quit their job if they were mandated to return to the office full time. And so it's finding ways to make that flexible by both sharing with employees how, what the benefits are of working in person, such as collaboration and building, that relationship with your coworkers and just having that culture and that atmosphere, with the flexibility of allowing them to balance, potentially new work life, commitments that due to the pandemic we're still faced with, right? So there's different needs, like personal and professional needs. But there is, we hear about that mandate return to office. There's a majority of employees who don't have the luxury. They are non-remote capable workers. So nearly 60% of employees throughout the pandemic and now, their job it cannot be done remote. Think of, production, manufacturing, service jobs, healthcare. Yeah, they can't be done remote. So it's just because it can't be done remote doesn't mean we can't offer them some sort of flexibility too. It just looks different. So looking at your organization and understanding which jobs can be done remotely versus those that have to be done in person, and how do we create that flexibility for them to meet both their personal and professional needs. When we talk about that upskilling, it's not only soft skills and human-centric leadership, but a lot of, talk about AI in the workplace, what it's going to replace people. They say there's going to be a shortage of employees, but AI is going to replace us all. Well, artificial intelligence was created by humans, right? So it's not that it's going to replace us, but it is going to augment the way that we do our work. So part of that upskilling is also learning how to leverage the technology that's going to augment or supplement or kind of change the way that we work today. And then my last but not least, something that it's getting some traction, and it wouldn't surprise me if in 2024 we see even more conversation surrounding it, is the ESG component of employee expectations, the employers' dedication to their environmental impact, their social impact, and then the way, the governance of the organization from leadership. How are we both aligning with our mission, vision, values, as well as how are we impacting the community in which we operate or we work? So as an employee, I want to work for an organization that's aligned with my morals, but is also a successful, financially stable organization. And there was a study done, I think it was by Fortune magazine, where organizations who have a strong ESG statement or commitment to environmental, social, and governance actually perform better financially, because more people tend to want to work for those organizations, or even consumers want to buy, or vendors want to supply those organizations that do good. So I know that's a lot of information, a lot of trends that we're seeing, and we're not sure if that's what you're seeing, but Nancy, I'll toss it back over to you,
Thank you.
to keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Wow. Well, that was an awesome conversation. And, you highlighted a few major trends: compliance, retention, the need to focus on retention, human-centered leadership, and how we need to upskill the talent that we have because we're not getting any more. So we would love now to head into our breakout session so that you all can talk in small groups about what HR challenges you are prioritizing in 2024. You heard a little bit from our panelists on what their crystal ball is forecasting, but now is your time for discussion. So we will have about 30 minutes in the breakout, so take your time and get to know each other. And a few reminders: the breakout room sessions will not be recorded, but we will capture general notes to share with everyone afterwards. All right. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and push you off into some breakout rooms. Enjoy your conversation. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you all had a wonderful conversation in your breakout room. I'm sure you could keep talking and talking and talking. Make sure to take advantage of reaching out to those people that you met so you can always continue the conversation after the cafe. We love the fact that people get to meet new people and make those connections. So welcome back, everyone. So during the breakout sessions, our note takers were capturing some of the themes, and we're going to review those. Take about 15 minutes here to sort of dig into some of the themes and hopefully have some time for some answers and questions. So what we're seeing is a lot of you are looking at recruitment and retention. I could have written retention because that was coming up a lot from the various rooms. In particular, candidate expectations and those hard to fill roles. So hopefully Theresa can enlighten us in a little bit about any tricks she may have from the trade. Employee well-being and mental health support in the workplace is another theme across the breakout sessions. And, this seems to be, an issue of, I think, probably upskilling, right? Upskilling our frontline managers and leaders and in HR and how to navigate employee well-being, and especially when it comes to mental health in the workplace, how to have those conversations in a safe and compliant way. Knowledge transferring, another theme we saw. So we've got generational differences. We have a lot of more senior professionals in those higher level roles within the organizations, and we need to start working on that succession plan. So knowledge transferring, upskilling that middle management so that they'll be prepared and ready to take on more executive leadership roles. It's very important work, and it requires a lot of thought and energy and a plan of attack. So that's a great theme there. Career mobility and career pathing. So not just your succession planning for the higher level executive roles, but more so, when we're facing the retention issues that we have, how do we look to our internal team that we already have in place and identify where their strengths are, where their interests are, so that we can get them in roles that will be fulfilling and that they'll stay and that they'll contribute at their highest ability. So really being able to identify what those key competencies are for your organization, and then having tools and systems in place to be able to evaluate your current talent and align them to the right career path. Generational differences. Not surprising here that is something we're coming up against and that we want to face head on in the new year. How do we enlighten each other on working in a multi-generational workforce so that we can leverage the strengths of all the different generations? Mitigating risk. Some people were talking about an uptick in EEOC, like Brenda mentioned. They're seeing it in their workplaces, as well as OSHA complaints. So safety. That's something that I think has been a little quiet for a while, but now we're seeing that uptick of, hey, I'm not happy about this. This is not as safe of a work environment as I'd like to see. And, OSHA has a very robust set of rules and regulations that organizations do need to pay attention to. And then we have equity concerns, from recruitment without bias to the compensation, and in particular around that compensation transparency. That seems to have some people concerned, or at least working on how they're going to implement that in their workplace. And then also taking a look at your policies and handbook. Is it in the language and the tone that is inclusive and welcoming to all? So those are some of the themes I captured from your notes. Thank you, note takers. But I would love to ask the group facilitators to kind of chime in at this point and share a little bit more about what you were hearing from your breakout room conversations.
This is Tara from Group 4, and we spent a lot of time talking about the development of leaders in particular, and the human-centered leadership, and how important it is to really upskill leaders to become more patient and more emotionally available over time. And then we started to talk about burnout issues across the board, and then you guys rudely pushed us back into the full group, so we didn't get to finish that conversation. But it was, it was a really good conversation, really focused a lot on how to upskill leaders.
A lot of group two's conversation revolved around skill-based hiring for some of those really difficult positions to fill, and then the equity with pay. So we talked about engineering roles and some of those roles that really do require education. It's not something that we can just go based off of skill set, and how a lot of the people coming into the workforce are expecting higher wages. And we did talk about wage transparency as well. And then mental health being a big piece of that as well. The incoming workforce being concerned about that and how we're supporting our employees with mental health and how we're bringing them along in that journey to actually get them involved.
And I think one of the things too, that how we go about this and creating equity and having these conversations, there was a lot of talk with a group of a lot more listening sessions, a lot more survey, a lot more engagement, really diving deep into listening to the employees, having them involved in designing of positions and roles and giving that feedback. So not only for current, what they're experiencing, but to help build what they want to see in the future.
I love that, Pam. The survey and the feedback, I know from my seat, a lot of times I get pushback a little bit from leaders to be like, well, we don't want to over survey people. And I really wonder if that's a thing. Maybe it's not a thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm a weird HR person, but I like taking surveys. I like giving my opinion. So, it is, I think, something to consider there. But in our group, we're very much like Tara's group. Sounds like we talked a lot about our mid-level leaders and how key they are to basically all the rest of our conversation today. They're really the drivers of culture. They're the drivers of engagement, because they are the conduit between our executive leaders and our frontline. So again, providing them the confidence to lead and to have conversation, and provide them the tools on how to do it well is a key driver for next year.
Yeah, group one, we probably touched on all the other things. One spot that we stayed at for quite some time was just the pay transparency and the wage bands and what that could mean as an employer, and also how to carefully be able to sort of quantify why you're at, wherever you fall in the continuum of the wage band, and how to make that clear. We also talked about the desire for people to see a career path right now seems to be, a good one. Also, in regards to ESG, it's not just a matter of, is a company with good, sound environmental, social, and governance important to you? Check the box, yes. It was encouraged that we say, and what does that mean to you? Because it has different meaning of what a candidate potentially be looking for. But if I may pose a question, because we don't have any state mandate of pay transparency, and of the few states that do have it, what might that mean? How granular, what might that mean for our employers in terms of, how that would be rolled out? Probably for you, Lisa.
I was gonna say, I can run with this. Well, I could start, and by all means, I know everybody will, chime in with their feedback, but I would say, at a bare minimum, be prepared to share what the pay range is for a job. And when I say that, don't be like those early adopters that said, the pay range for this position is $1 to $1 million. That's worse than just not publishing it at all. It's compliant because you put a price out there, but it's not realistic. It's like that, those preteen years where they're talking back, just, they've got to argue with everything. They're giving you a response, but it's not reasonable. It's also not helpful for employees or job seekers to see such, such a broad range, or almost a laughable range for a position. Because when it doesn't show them, what the value of that position is at that organization, or what their earning potential is in that role. So I would say, at a bare minimum, be prepared to share a realistic pay range for that position. Think critically about what, your company from a budget and from an internal value perspective would offer for, for talent in that role. And I'm not saying that you have to put a specific dollar amount and say this is what anybody who applies is going to get, but make it reasonable. And of course, it's based on your different compensable factors: education, experience, authority, autonomy, whatever the candidate comes with. But set a realistic expectation. And there's a large number of employees that won't even apply to a job if a pay range isn't posted. So it's, an effort in the attracting people, be realistic. And then it may help identify those, you don't want to waste their time, just like they don't want to waste yours. But I would say that that's probably the first thing to be prepared for. I think the bill, in particular, the House bill that's up for review in 2024 is about providing pay ranges upon request. So Michigan is still lagging other states that have more, that want more out there from the beginning. But the bill that's currently in consideration is just upon request. But you better believe that if we have to provide it for candidates, employees are going to start asking, and we're going to want to be ready to provide that. And also keeping in mind, if the positions that you're hiring for could be completed, or could be, you could hire a remote worker to do them. And that remote worker potentially lives in New York, California, one of those states or localities that have more specific pay transparency laws. You will need to comply with their laws. So if you're hiring somebody from, Washington State, you need to comply with the specifics of where that person is going to be based and performing their work. So I'd say, get pretty comfortable and confident and have those conversations as a leadership team about your approach to compensation, your philosophy, and build some framework around it so you're ready to be able to share that and confidently and comfortably and know that it's aligned with your, mission, vision, values. And that's really what it is, an opportunity to have that conversation and educate your employees about our approach to pay.
That's really good insight, Lisa. Thank you. And Jamie, that was an awesome question that you posed. And I want to invite the rest of the group to also ask some questions, and use the chat for that. And we'll monitor the chat and try to work in some of your specific questions for the panelists.
And I just totally stole that question from one of my group members. So,
yeah.
too. So yes.
Yeah, because you're an awesome facilitator. Thank you. Appreciate that. So just to keep the conversation moving along, Theresa, there was a lot of mention around recruitment, retention, the challenges therein. What advice do you have for people if they're looking at really revamping how they're approaching recruitment in the new year?
So big loaded question, Nancy, but I think, you really need to start off with what's your talent strategy? What are your growth plans as an organization? And therein, then what type of roles? And you need to start now. Early career hiring. Are you in the high schools in your community talking to them about your organization and the opportunities that you have? Again, it's all about that casting a wide net. So what things can you do specific to your industry, the jobs that you're going to need, in the future now, actually, and in the future, train up into the future. And I know we've talked about this whole skills-based hiring, but really, what's it look like to build a skills-based organization, and how do you transfer talent, across the organization? We were actually talking the other day about the different roles that Lisa's had here at HR Collaborative, the different roles I've had. And it's really, it's as we've increased our skills and setting your organization up for that kind of training and development and movement, because it is going to be necessary. So I think it starts at that big picture. To answer your question, Nancy, what's your strategy? I think, I don't know if that's on our call today, but I was thinking about that this morning, how Beth if she'll meet with an HR, a college student in HR, she had one in yesterday who's, I think, just in his junior year. We're developing that pipeline of talent now. Trent, who's one of our talent engagement specialists, he started as an intern. A lot of us, started our careers really early, but here's the leader of an organization, our visionary, you know, bringing in a college student to start building that pipeline, how, you know, how do we get involved now? So.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, we're getting some questions, team. Here's one from Tara. Employee experience is so important for retention. An employer can't say yes to everything. How do you help businesses pick the most impactful items? You want to take that one, Brenda?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, I can really appreciate when organizations stick to their values and their mission. I mean, then you always kind of have that North Star that you're going towards essentially, and everyone is on the same page. So, I mean, we are in a world of information overload 24/7. So how do we keep our focus on what we're supposed to be focused on? And I think that's a big challenge for leaders, you know, because employees get lost when we're constantly shifting our priorities and our focus. So I would say the more consistent we can be, and you know, things happen and we do have to shift and adjust and be flexible. I'm not saying that like we think this is what we're focusing on and this is the only direction we're going. You know, we have to be aware, but as much as we can control the things that we want to prioritize and tie it back to, you know, what's important to us and where do we want to get? You know, I think that's kind of the path that employers have to take. And also, I mean, you have to also continue to listen to your employees. We're hearing that so much right now, and they just want to be heard. But I will say, you know, we were kind of talking about, you know, surveying employees and everything. And, you know, often at times we'll get leaders and be like, well, they don't like surveys. I don't think we want to do them. And I don't think people mind taking surveys. I think they mind if they take a survey and they provide feedback and there's nothing done with the feedback. So that is always the key. I mean, feedback is only as useful as what you do with it. So employees want to be heard, but they have to see that they're being heard. So don't ask for my opinion, but then do nothing with it, you know. So that's kind of the golden key, I think, for in terms of far as feedback and you know, and hearing their ideas out because they want to be able to contribute too. So.
And it right along with that, you know, we understand you can't say yes to everything, but if, you know, you can say no, there's nothing wrong with saying no. Just put some context around it, explain to them why it's not something that we can do. It's not that it's not that they want to hear no, but they don't want to hear no. And then, you know, why not? You know, again, it goes back to being heard and understanding, and using it as an opportunity to educate them. You know, maybe it's a financial thing. Maybe it's not aligned with where our business goals are or our values, and just explaining to them why that would not be something that our organization could commit to. And then, you know, they can make their decision from there, depending on, you know, what their requests are. Yeah, it's a conversation. It's that feedback loop. You know, it's not a beginning and end, it's continual.
I'll just throw in from a recruiting perspective too. If you think about a stat regarding, I think it was like 3/4 of college students are non-traditional, right? So if you think about recruiting non-traditional students, you know, what's that look like to attract them? You know, again, you can't do the same thing for everybody. You can't do 50 things for everybody, but I could do this one. It's the equity thing. I could do this one thing for you because this meets your need. I can do this different thing for you because it meets your need. So if you think things around, you know, it doesn't all have to be the same, but you know, what's equitable from a engagement perspective. And I'd like you to share what you were talking about as it relates to the mental health.
Yeah,
because I think this speaks to that too.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, and this also goes back to our topic of skilling up that mid-level management. But so Workforce Institute did a study earlier this year, and they found that 69% of employees say that their leader directly impacts their mental health. Now, to kind of put that in perspective, that is more than their doctor, more than their therapist, and that is right on par with their significant other or spouse. So if you think about the impact you have as a leader on someone's mental health, like that's massive. That is huge. And then when we talk about retention and, you know, keeping people, you know, that has a big factor in it. And I think, again, that's where we're like, it's very important to skill up these mid-level managers because they're the front line to these employees and they have that strong impact on it. So just kind of understanding, you know, what their needs are and as leaders in organizations, being able to be there for, our employees in all aspects, and not just from a skills base, but from an EQ base and everything as well.
That's great. Thank you. We have another question, if we can get to it, from Anna. Leaders have very little skill building around having candid and difficult conversations in a kind and uncharged way. Most people are reasonable and can handle the truth if it's delivered in a clear and kind way. Any comments on how best to help our leaders?
I 100% agree with that, and I think you take more of a partnership and coaching approach than a disciplinary approach. And to us, especially as we're starting to get more generations into the workforce, that, that's a whole nother, we could do an entire cafe on generations in the workforce. But I think, understanding how people react and what they kind of expect when it comes to development and coaching and that sort of thing, because each generation is impacted differently, and they handle information differently, and they want information differently. So I think just kind of understanding some of those aspects too. It's a lot. It's a lot. Leaders don't have easy jobs, that's for sure. So, as employers and as HR support, like how can we help them through that? And, there are, trainings and educations and workshops on, things that have, like, how to have crucial conversations. There's a lot out there, but again, it's just kind of like filtering through all of that and figuring out what's going to be most effective in terms of, preparing for those conversations.
And I think as organizations too, a lot of organizations have traditionally gotten a habit of those high performing individual contributors. They just automatically make a manager, and they just assume that they're going to know how to manage people. And that's not always the case. And then in other organizations, they expect them to still be, hands-on, doing the work while also managing people. And so as, HR professionals and organizations, we have to evaluate what expectations are we putting on these managers? Do they have the capacity to be able to do both of those things? And the people management portion, if they don't have that experience, seeking out, identifying what skills are necessary for those leaders, and providing them with resources, and encouraging them, to leverage those resources to become a really well-rounded leader. And a lot of it goes back to that human-centric leadership is, people are people, they're not cogs in a wheel. They're, you really have to be able to have empathy. And those frontline managers have a really difficult job because they're balancing the needs of the business and the needs of their people. So, understanding that there's a lot of pressure on them, and that we have to give them some grace as well.
I'm hoping we have time for one more question, and this was around the EEOC. If employers are concerned, Brenda, about getting that EEOC claim or that OSHA complaint, what is the one thing that you would recommend they do to try to ward that off?
One thing?
Well, that's what they said, but maybe there's a couple things.
So I would say if I had one thing, one word is consistency. I think, if you have clear and consistent policies and you follow them clear and consistently, that's your best bet. Where we get in trouble is where we start making exceptions, or we don't hold certain people accountable, but we hold other people accountable, or we start justifying in a way of like, well, I could pay this person a little bit more, and maybe we're not sticking to that pay range that we developed. And, at smaller companies, it's kind of easier to, again, going back to like, well, they're going to do this extra job because they have experience in that and the other person doesn't. And you want to compensate for that, but like, you also have to make sure that you're being fair and consistent too. So I would say consistent is probably the one thing that really comes to mind. But then also the other kind of trend that we've been talking a lot about today is just making sure people feel heard. Because if they're happy, they're not going to, and I don't want to say like be out to get you, but like, things might slip up or things might happen. But if they feel valued and they feel heard, they're less likely to get really worked up about it, and they might just be able to have a conversation with you about it, and you might be able to settle it in that way. But if employees don't feel heard, they don't feel valued, like they're gonna get upset. So I think being consistent and making sure employees feel heard, those are gonna be two, major things, as far as avoiding any sort of EEOC.
Great advice to end on. Thank you so much. And I want to just take a second to thank our panelists. Applause, jazz hands to the three of you. Thank you for bringing great insights, and thank you for all of our participants today also for bringing great insights. I have a couple other items to share with you before we wrap for the day. I'm going to share my screen again. So Brenda and the rest of the team shared a lot of insights into the changing compliance landscape. As a gift for you, if you haven't downloaded our compliance guide, here's a great opportunity to do so. And then I want to take a minute to have you save the date for our next collaborative cafe. Our next one will be held in February on Thursday the 8th, again a morning session, virtual, and we'll be talking about finding talent in 2024. That was a big topic today that we could just scratch the surface of, and so here in February we'll be able to dig in a little bit more and get to some of the tactical strategies on helping you find those hard to find folks. So, and as another reminder, we'll be sharing today's cafe presentation and all of the breakout room notes tomorrow, along with a video recap next week. So keep your eye on your inbox. And again, I just want to thank you all for being here. This was just a fabulous conversation, and wishing you all the best this holiday season, and we'll see you next year.